Hey, First United Methodist family, it's Pastor Shannon here with our weekly update for March 12th. I wanted to take this opportunity to talk a little bit more about General Conference. The next General Conference for the United Methodist Church is happening in just a few weeks. It's the last week of April and the first week of May. And this gathering of the General Conference, it usually takes place every 4 years, but because of the COVID pandemic, we haven't actually met in this way since 2019. Now, if you're new to the United Methodist Church, if you haven't been a part of our church for very long, you might be wondering, what is the General Conference and why does it matter to me? Now, the General Conference is kind of the highest legislative or decision-making body in the United Methodist Church. It's the only body that can make changes to our book of discipline, to any of our doctrine or theology, our book of resolutions. It's made up of delegates from all over the world. This year, there's a little over 850 delegates, and it's always an equal number of lay or non-clergy delegates and clergy delegates. So we have equal representation from those of us that have been to seminary and those who are regular lay people sitting in the pews. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Most of what happens at General Conference, like 90% of what happens at General Conference, has absolutely no impact on how we live our lives and do church here in the local church at First United Methodist. Nothing that they say or decide really impacts the ministry and the mission that we are called to here in Excelsior Springs. But I'm a church nerd, and maybe you're kind of a church polity nerd like me, so you might be interested to hear what's kind of on the docket or what's going to be discussed this upcoming General Conference. So there's about 3 big proposals that are expected to come to the vote, to come to the floor, and here are what they are. The first is a proposal to regionalize the United Methodist Church. So right now, this General Conference is a global gathering body. We have delegates from Africa, from Philippines, from Europe, from all over the world. But regionalizing would allow us to have a little bit more flexibility within each of our regions. So there'd be a United States region, there'd be an Africa region, there'd be a Europe region, there'd be a Philippines region. And that way they can, each region can do ministry within its own local context in ways that make a lot more sense. And really, this actually impacts the other non-U.S. regions a lot more. Because right now, when people come to General Conference, most of what they're talking about really only impacts the U.S. church and U.S. pastors. They talk about things like pensions and retirement that have absolutely no applicability to people in the Philippines or in Africa. So this would just allow the United Methodist Church to be a little bit more nimble and flexible as it makes decisions in the future. And the second big proposal is about pension and retirement plans. They have proposed a new way to essentially do retirement for pastors. As you all know, people are living a lot longer these days, and while that's great, it leads to the risk of pastors running out of retirement benefits before they die. So this just restructures the retirement plan to allow for pastors to put more into their retirement plans so that they can make sure that they have enough money to last the whole rest of their lives. And the third big proposal is around inclusive language, and that's the one that is getting a lot of attention and that most people are the most interested in learning about. And essentially, the proposals that are going to be on the floor would be to remove any language around LGBTQ individuals within the Book of Discipline. Essentially, this would leave it up to each individual church as to whether they wanted to marry same-sex couples, and it would leave it up to each conference whether or not they want to ordain openly gay pastors. Now, as our bishop put it in a webinar that I took part in last week, this removal of language makes it a may, not a shall. So in other words, no church and no pastor will ever be forced to do anything that's outside of their conscience, that's outside of what they personally believe in. But this language also opens it up and gives freedom to those churches and conferences and pastors who want to be more inclusive towards LGBTQ persons. But I want to reiterate once again that no matter what happens at General Conference in a couple of months, none of that will affect what we're doing here at First United Methodist in Excelsior Springs. Maybe nothing will pass and things will pretty much just stay the same. But even if these proposals do change, we are still called to the mission of making disciples for the transformation of the world right here in our community. And no language change or regionalization or retirement proposals will change that mission that we are called to. So if you are a church polity nerd like me, I'm going to include a link to a longer webinar that our conference and our bishop put together to go into a lot more depth around these areas. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. I found it really interesting. If you want to be able to take a look through it, you can. We'll also be talking more about General Conference as it gets closer. We'll be talking about it more in church in later April and early May. So until then, we are still in the season of Lent, and next Sunday we continue our study of Mark by looking at Jesus as our ransom and our servant. And I hope to see you then.